A man was seconds away from pulling a gun backstage in Las Vegas. Not on the street, not in a dark alley, but behind the curtain of one of the most famous stages in America. No one tried to stop him. Not security, not the police, not the men who knew exactly what he was capable of. Everyone in that room understood the rules. You didn't interfere, you didn't look too long, and you definitely didn't speak unless you were prepared to live with the consequences. But one man noticed something the others didn't. He noticed the silence, the kind of silence that comes right before everything falls apart. Stay until the end, because what happens next is something no one there expected. And before we begin, tell us where you're watching from. Las Vegas in the 1960s was not the city people imagine today. It wasn't neon and celebration. It was control. Behind every bright sign was someone making sure the night ended the way it was supposed to. Backstage at the Sands Hotel, that control was slipping. A man stood too close to another man. A voice had been raised when it shouldn't have been. An insult, small, careless, and irreversible, hung in the air. People stopped moving. No one looked at the man's hands, but everyone knew where to expect them to go. Dean Martin was standing nearby, waiting to go on stage. He had seen moments like this before, moments when people mistook noise for power, moments when pride demanded an answer. He didn't step forward right away. He watched. He listened. And when he finally spoke, he didn't say what anyone expected. Not then. Not ever. To understand why that single sentence mattered, why it stopped everything, you need to understand the men in that room, the city they were standing in, and the unspoken language of fear that ruled Las Vegas at the time. This isn't a story about violence. It's about restraint. It's about knowing exactly what to say, and when saying less is the most dangerous move of all. Backstage at the Sands Hotel had a way of revealing who people really were. On stage, everything was light, rhythm, charm. Backstage was different. It stripped away performance and left only instinct. The walls were narrow, the lighting uneven, the air heavy with cigarette smoke and unspoken agreements. Men who smiled easily in public learned to keep their mouths shut here. They knew better. Silence wasn't politeness in this place, it was survival. Dean Martin stood just off to the side of the corridor leading toward the stage entrance, adjusting his cufflink with the slow, unhurried movements people mistook for indifference. He had learned long ago that rushing signaled weakness. Calm was not just a personality trait in Las Vegas, it was a shield. Around him, the usual pre-show routine unfolded. Stagehands moving equipment, assistants checking lists, security scanning faces without appearing to look too closely. Everything seemed normal, and that was precisely what made the tension noticeable. When danger approached in places like this, it rarely announced itself. It crept in quietly, changing the rhythm before anyone realized what was wrong. Dean felt it before he saw it, a subtle shift. Voices lowered instead of rising, laughter cut off mid-sentence, the kind of pause that didn't belong. He glanced down the corridor and saw two men standing closer than necessary. One of them was young, stiff in his posture, his hands unsure of where to rest. The other was older, broader, with the relaxed stance of someone who had never needed to explain himself to anyone. The space between them was charged, like a wire pulled too tight. The younger man spoke first, his voice controlled but strained. "I was told to wait here." It wasn't an accusation, just a statement, but it landed wrong. The older man tilted his head slightly, as if tasting the words. That gesture alone caused a nearby stagehand to take a step back. Dean noticed that, too. People reacted before they thought, and reactions told the truth faster than words ever could. "This always isn't yours," the older man replied, his tone low, almost conversational. The calmness was deceptive. Men like him didn't raise their voices when they were angry. They raised them when they wanted witnesses. Silence meant something else entirely. Dean leaned subtly toward a crew member standing nearby. "Who's the kid?" he asked quietly. The crew member hesitated. Eyes darted toward the man before answering. "Doesn't matter," he muttered. Dean didn't press, but the answer told him everything he needed to know. If it truly didn't matter, the man wouldn't have hesitated. The younger man shifted his weight. That was the mistake. Movement, however slight, suggested uncertainty, and uncertainty was often read as disrespect. The older man took a step forward, not aggressive, not hurried, just enough to reclaim control of the space. The corridor felt narrower instantly, as if the walls had leaned in to listen. People nearby pretended to focus on their tasks. No one wanted to be part of this moment. In Las Vegas, involvement was dangerous. Witnesses were liabilities. Even the security guard at the end of the corridor slowed his approach and stopped, his body language speaking louder than any refusal. He wouldn't intervene. He couldn't afford to. Dean observed all of this without moving. He had seen similar scenes play out in dressing rooms, hotel lobbies, private dining areas. The pattern was always the same: a perceived slight, a reminder of hierarchy, a moment where pride demanded resolution. Most people thought violence came from anger, but Dean knew it usually came from humiliation. The need to reassert control was far more dangerous than rage. The older man spoke again. "You got something to say to me?" His eyes flicked briefly toward Dean, acknowledging his presence without addressing it. Dean caught the look and understood the message: stay out of it. Dean didn't. Not yet. He waited. Timing mattered. Interrupt too early and you became the problem. Interrupt too late and you became irrelevant. A stagehand whispered urgently to another, "This is getting bad." The other shook his head, barely perceptible. They both knew there was nothing to be done. This was above their pay grade, above most people's. Dean finally stepped forward just enough to be noticed. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't square his shoulders. He simply entered the line of sight. "Everything all right back here?" he asked casually, as if commenting on the weather. The effect was immediate. Both men turned toward him. The younger one looked relieved, his eyes briefly meeting Dean's in silent appeal. The older one looked annoyed.
"Dean," the older man said, forcing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Didn't expect to see you here." Dean returned the smile, easy and familiar. "Hard to miss me most nights." A few nervous chuckles followed, thin and forced. Humor had always been Dean's currency, but tonight it didn't buy much. "We're having a conversation," the older man continued. "Private." Dean nodded. "Backstage doesn't have much privacy." He gestured vaguely around them. "Just quieter corners." The older man studied him. "You telling me how this place works now?" Dean shrugged lightly. "Just reminding you how it usually ends." The words were calm, but they carried weight. Dean didn't threaten. He implied consequence. There was a difference, and men like this one understood it. For a moment, it looked like the tension might ease. The older man stepped back a fraction, enough to give the younger man room to breathe. Several people nearby exhaled quietly, believing, hoping that the worst had passed. Dean wasn't convinced. Situations like this didn't dissolve so easily. They paused. They waited for an excuse to reignite. The excuse came in the form of a laugh. It was small, unintentional, the kind of sound someone made out of nervous reflex rather than amusement. But timing mattered more than intent. The laugh sliced through the fragile calm like glass. The older man's expression hardened instantly. His jaw tightened. His hand moved closer to his coat, not drawing attention, just preparing. The hallway froze. Dean saw it clearly now. This was the moment, the point of no return people talked about later, after everything had gone wrong. Dean spoke before anyone else could react. "Funny thing about laughter," he said, his tone almost playful. "People hear it and think it means the same thing every time." The words redirected attention, if only briefly. The older man looked back at him, irritation flickering across his face. "You still here, Dean?" the man asked. Dean nodded. "Seems so. You planning to sing or you planning to referee?" Dean tilted his head, considering. "Depends how the night goes." A few people exchanged glances. This wasn't how Dean Martin was supposed to behave backstage. He was expected to charm audiences, not interfere in matters that could turn ugly fast. The older man stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Are you stepping in?" Dean didn't answer immediately. He let the silence stretch. Silence made people uncomfortable. It forced them to fill the space with assumptions. Finally, he said, "I'm stepping between." The statement wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. "Between what?" the man asked. "Between a bad decision and a long memory." The younger man looked at Dean, eyes wide, fear barely contained. "I didn't mean anything," he started to say. Dean raised his hand gently, stopping him. "I know," he said, without looking away from the older man. The older man laughed sharply. "You think words fix this?" Dean met his gaze. "The right ones do." That gave the older man a pause. He searched Dean's face for uncertainty, for arrogance, for fear. He found none. Dean's expression was calm, almost detached, but not dismissive. It was the look of someone who understood exactly what was at stake. "You got guts," the older man said. "Or you're stupid." Dean smiled faintly. "I hear that a lot." The band outside hit a cue. Applause erupted from the audience, loud and joyful, completely unaware of the tension simmering just feet away. The contrast was almost surreal. Life continuing on stage while it teetered on the edge backstage. The older man leaned in closer. "Say what you're gonna say." Dean shook his head slowly. "Not yet." The man frowned. "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means timing matters, and this isn't it." The older man's patience thinned. "You playing games with me?" "No," said Dean evenly. "I'm trying to end one." Another pause. Then the older man scoffed. "You've got 30 seconds. Dean nodded once. "That's all I need." A voice crackled over the nearby speaker. "Dean, you're up." The stage manager's tone was neutral, but the urgency was clear. Dean straightened his jacket, smoothing the fabric as if preparing for any other night. He looked briefly at the younger man. "Stay where you are," he said quietly. Then he turned back to the older man. "And don't move." The older man smirked. "You don't give orders." Dean smiled back, calm and unshaken. "I don't have to." He turned toward the stage entrance, stopping just short of the curtain. He didn't rush. He didn't hesitate. He simply waited, feeling the weight of the moment pressing in from behind him. The sentence was coming. But not yet. The curtain felt thinner from this side. Dean Martin stood just behind it, the applause washing over him in waves that sounded almost artificial now. He could hear the band settling into the opening bars, the audience clapping on instinct, unaware of how close the night had come to going wrong. He didn't move yet. He listened. Timing mattered more than presence, and presence mattered more than noise. Behind him, the corridor held its breath. The older man hadn't moved. Neither had the younger one. People nearby pretended to busy themselves, but their eyes kept drifting back to the same 2 points in space: the man who held the room without raising his voice, and the man who could still break it with a single gesture. The stage manager leaned in close to Dean, voice low. "You want me to delay?" Dean shook his head. "No, let it run." "You sure?" the stage manager asked. "This doesn't feel—" Dean cut him off gently. "It never does."
The stage manager swallowed and stepped back. Dean could feel the pressure now, not from the audience, but from the expectation backstage. People wanted him to fix it, or to leave it alone. Either choice would say something about who he was. Dean had learned long ago that reputation was built as much on what you didn't do as what you did. The older man cleared his throat. "You planning on keeping us waiting?" he asked. Dean turned slightly, enough to acknowledge him without fully facing him. "Just giving the room time to calm down." The man scoffed. "The room doesn't get to decide." Dean's eyes flicked toward the security guard again. The guard still hadn't moved. "Funny thing," Dean said, conversational. "Sometimes it does." The older man followed his glance and smirked. "You expecting help?" Dean shook his head. "No." "Good," the man replied, "because you won't get it." Dean smiled faintly. "I know." That answer unsettled the man more than defiance would have. He took a step closer, lowering his voice. "You think because you sing a few songs you get to stand in the middle of things like this?" Dean met his gaze. "I think because I've been standing in the middle of things like this my whole life, I know when not to move." The younger man finally spoke, his voice tight. "I said I didn't mean anything." The older man didn't look at him. "I didn't ask." Dean raised his hand again, palm open. He already said enough. The older man laughed quietly. "You got a soft spot tonight, Dean?" Dean considered the question. "No," he said. "I've got a sense of scale." The band outside hit another cue. Dean could feel the timing slipping. He stepped closer to the curtain, letting the light brush his shoulder, then stopped. The audience's noise surged. It gave him cover. Words spoken now would land differently than words spoken in silence. "Let me ask you something," Dean said, turning back to the older man. "What happens next if you take one more step?" The man's jaw tightened. "You don't want to find out?" Dean nodded. "That's what I'm saying." The man's eyes narrowed. "You trying to save him?" he asked, jerking his chin toward the younger man. Dean didn't answer immediately. He looked at the younger man instead, really looked at him. The fear wasn't theatrical. It wasn't exaggerated. It was the quiet kind that comes when someone realizes how little control they have. Dean turned back. "I'm trying to save tonight." The older man snorted. "Nights come and go." Dean's voice dropped. "Some don't." That landed. The man hesitated just for a beat. Dean saw it and pressed gently, not with force, but with familiarity. "You've been around long enough to know how stories get told," Dean said. "This one doesn't get a headline." The man studied him. "You worried about headlines now?" Dean shrugged. "I'm worried about memory." The younger man shifted again, then froze when the older man glanced his way. Dean spoke quickly. "He's not the point," he said. "He's the excuse." The man's eyes snapped back to Dean. "Careful." Dean didn't flinch. "That's exactly what I'm being." A murmur rippled through the nearby crew. Someone whispered, "This is insane." Another replied, "Let him finish." Dean caught fragments, not words, but intention. People wanted this to end. They didn't care how. The older man leaned closer. "You keep talking like you're in charge." Dean shook his head. "I'm talking like someone who knows when not to push." The man's lips curled. "You think restraint makes you powerful?" Dean smiled slightly. "No, I think knowing when you don't need power does." The older man stared at him, recalculating. The corridor felt tighter now, the air thick with unspoken options. Dean could almost hear the man's thoughts. Humiliation versus consequence, now versus later, noise versus silence. "Say your sentence," the man said again, impatience creeping into his voice. Dean glanced toward the curtain where the applause swelled and dipped. He timed his breath with it. "Not yet," he repeated. The man's patience snapped. "You don't get to control when." Dean interrupted him, his tone still calm but firmer now. "I do if I'm the only one talking." That stopped the man cold. The words weren't threatening, they were factual, and facts were harder to argue with than insults. The stage manager appeared again, eyes wide. "Dean," he hissed, "we can stall for maybe a minute." Dean nodded once. That's plenty. The older man looked between them. You coordinating now? Dean smiled. Always have been. The man's hand moved again, closer to his coat. The movement was subtle, but everyone saw it. The younger man inhaled sharply. Dean spoke immediately, voice steady. If you do that, he said, you turn this into something you can't walk away from. The man's eyes burned. You think I can't? Dean shook his head slowly. I think you don't need to. Silence pressed down again. Dean felt the room leaning toward him, not because they trusted him, but because they wanted relief. People always sided with the exit when tension grew unbearable. The older man exhaled through his nose. You've got nerve. Dean nodded. I've got perspective. And what's that? The man asked. Dean leaned in just enough to lower his voice, making the moment private without hiding it. Nobody in this hallway remembers the nights that ended quietly, Dean said. They remember the ones that went too far. The man studied him for a long moment. You think you can stop that with words? Dean answered without hesitation. I know I can. The band outside reached the end of a number. The applause peaked, then faded. The timing window was closing. Dean straightened, the decision settling in his posture. He looked at the younger man. You're going to walk out of here in a minute. Not fast, not slow. You're going to look like you belong. The younger man nodded frantically. Yes. The older man barked. I didn't say he could leave. Dean turned back. You didn't say he couldn't. The man stared at him, then laughed, sharp and humorless. You're pushing it. Dean's smile faded slightly. I'm ending it. The man leaned back, considering. Around them, the corridor seemed to widen just a little. People sensed a shift, though they didn't know which way it would go. All right, the older man said finally. You talk a lot about timing. When is it? Dean didn't answer right away. He listened to the stage, to the faint echo of applause, to the quiet hum that followed. Then he looked the man in the eye and said, right after I step out there. The man frowned. You planning to say it on stage? Dean shook his head. No, I'm planning to let you hear the room. Confusion flickered across the man's face. Dean pressed on. Do you hear them? He asked softly. They don't know you. They don't care about you. They came for a show. You want to be the reason it stops? The man hesitated. Dean saw it clearly now, the calculation tipping. The man wanted control, not attention. Dean was offering him a way to keep one without risking the other. You got 10 seconds, the man said. Dean nodded. That's generous. He turned toward the curtain again, pausing just before stepping through. When I come back, he said over his shoulder, we'll finish this. The man didn't answer. Dean stepped into the light. The applause roared, immediate and overwhelming. Dean smiled, raised a hand, and waited for it to settle. From the corner of his eye, he could see the curtain behind him, the thin barrier between two worlds. He began his opening line on stage, voice smooth, effortless, the king of cool in full control. The audience relaxed instantly. Backstage, the corridor waited. The sentence was closer now, and everyone could feel it.
On stage, Dean Martin made it look effortless. That was always the trick. He stepped into the light as if nothing in the world could possibly concern him more than the microphone in front of him. The applause washed over the room, loud and obedient, and Dean waited just long enough for it to peak before lifting his hand. Silence followed almost immediately. The audience trusted him. They always had. When Dean Martin asked for quiet, people gave it to him without thinking. Easy, he said with a faint smile. We just got started. Laughter rippled through the crowd. The band followed his lead, easing into the rhythm he set. To the audience, it was another perfect opening. To Dean, it was cover. Sound mattered, attention mattered, and right now every ear in the building was pointed in the same direction. Behind the curtain, the corridor felt different. The tension hadn't disappeared, but it had shifted. Noise from the stage filtered back, dulling the sharp edges of the moment. People breathed again, cautiously, as if afraid the wrong movement might pull everything back into focus. The older man stood where Dean had left him, arms relaxed but eyes alert. He watched the curtain, listening not to the music, but to the reaction. The younger man remained still, just as Dean had told him,
His hands trembled slightly at his sides. "You hear that?" the older man said quietly, not looking at him. The younger man nodded. "Yeah, that's what control sounds like," the man said. "Not shouting, not threats." The younger man swallowed. "Then why am I still here?" The older man finally turned toward him, because control doesn't like to be tested. Across the corridor, the security guard shifted his weight for the first time all night. He didn't step forward, but he didn't step back either. The change was small, almost meaningless, but in rooms like this, small movements mattered. Dean's voice drifted back between songs. "You folks doing all right out there?" The audience responded warmly, laughter rising again. Dean smiled, then leaned into the microphone. "Good. I'd hate to think anyone was uncomfortable." The older man's jaw tightened. He understood the implication. Dean wasn't just entertaining anymore. He was narrating. "He's good," the man muttered. The stage manager nodded nervously. "That's Dean." The older man glanced at him. "Always this involved?" The stage manager hesitated. "Only when it matters." Dean continued, weaving stories between songs, letting the room settle into him. He talked about the city, about nights that went on longer than planned, about people who thought they knew how things worked until they didn't. The audience laughed, but a few people closer to the wings felt something else underneath the humor, a tension they couldn't quite name. Backstage, the older man leaned against the wall, arms crossed now. "He thinks he's clever." A voice answered from the shadows. "He is." The older man turned sharply. "You got something to add?" The voice belonged to a man who hadn't spoken all night, someone who'd been watching quietly. "I've seen him do this before. He lets people hear themselves." The older man frowned. "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means he's not talking to you," the man replied. "He's talking around you." The older man looked back toward the curtain. Dean had just finished a song. The applause was immediate, enthusiastic. Dean waited again, letting it swell before cutting it off with a raised hand. The room obeyed. "That's not power," the older man said. "That's popularity." The man in the shadows shook his head. "No, that's consent." The word lingered. The older man didn't like it. Consent suggested choice, and choice made control fragile. Dean leaned into the microphone again. "You ever notice," he said lightly, "how quiet a room gets when it doesn't want trouble?" A ripple of laughter followed, but some people shifted in their seats. "Funny thing is, quiet doesn't mean weak. It usually means smart." Backstage, the older man exhaled slowly. "He's talking about me." "No," the man in the shadows said. "He's talking to the room." The younger man looked between them. "What happens when he comes back?" The older man didn't answer right away. He watched the curtain as if it might speak first. "Depends what he says." On stage, Dean told a short story about a night that almost went wrong. He kept it vague, humorous, harmless on the surface, but the cadence was deliberate. He slowed when he needed people to listen. He sped up when he wanted them relaxed. Dean understood crowds the way some men understood engines. He knew what pressure to apply and when to ease off. "And that's the thing," Dean said, smiling. "Most disasters don't start with explosions. They start with someone deciding they won't let something go." The applause was softer this time, thoughtful. Dean nodded, satisfied. Backstage, the older man pushed himself off the wall. "He's stalling." The stage manager nodded. "He always does." "For what?" the man asked. The stage manager hesitated, then answered honestly, "For the moment to arrive." The older man laughed quietly. "You really believe that?" "I've seen it, so have you." The older man fell silent. The younger man dared to speak again. Am Am I leaving? The older man glanced at him. If you're smart. The younger man nodded quickly. I am. Good. Then don't make me regret it. The younger man looked toward the curtain, hope flickering briefly across his face. He's doing this for me, isn't he? The older man shook his head. No, he's doing this so nobody has to remember tonight. The younger man didn't fully understand, but he didn't argue. On stage, Dean reached the end of his set. The applause rose again, louder now, relieved. Dean smiled broadly, soaking it in for just a second before stepping back from the microphone. Don't go anywhere, I'll be right back. As the band played a brief interlude, Dean stepped off stage and through the curtain. The corridor came into focus instantly. Every eye turned toward him. The noise from the audience faded into a distant hum. Dean looked around, taking in the scene exactly as he had left it. The older man, the younger man, the guard, the crew. He nodded once, as if confirming something to himself. You ready? The older man asked. Dean tilted his head. I was ready before I walked out there. The man smirked. Then why wait? Dean's expression remained calm. Because now, he said, everyone's listening. The man glanced toward the curtain, then back at Dean. He could feel it too, the difference. The room wasn't isolated anymore. It was connected. Whatever happened next wouldn't stay hidden. Going to say it now? The man asked. Dean stepped closer, lowering his voice just enough to keep the moment contained, without hiding it. I am. The corridor seemed to tighten again, anticipation replacing fear. The younger man held his breath. The security guard straightened fully now, no longer pretending not to watch. Dean looked directly at the older man. Before I do, he said, you should know something. The man raised an eyebrow. What's that? Dean smiled faintly. Once it's said, it can't be taken back. The man studied him. You threatening me? Dean shook his head. I'm warning you. Silence pressed in. The sentence hovered just out of reach, heavy with expectation. Dean inhaled slowly. And then he stopped. Not yet, he said softly. The older man stared in disbelief. You're kidding. Dean glanced toward the curtain. They're waiting. The man laughed sharply and frustrated. You're unbelievable. Dean nodded. That's why this works. He turned back toward the curtain. Give me 1 more minute. The older man hesitated, then waved a hand dismissively. You've got it. Dean stepped back into the light again, applause rising immediately as if summoned. Dean smiled at the crowd, but his mind was still backstage. He knew the sentence now. He had always known it. The waiting wasn't about finding the words. It was about making sure they landed. The room behind him waited again, and this time, everyone understood what was coming.
Dean Martin stepped back through the curtain for the last time that night. The applause behind him faded quickly, as if the building itself understood that the real moment was no longer on stage. Backstage, no one spoke. The corridor was still. The older man stood exactly where he had been before, watching Dean approach, with a look that was no longer aggressive, but cautious. That alone said everything. Dean didn't rush. He didn't perform. He stopped a few steps away and let the silence do its work. Silence had weight now. It belonged to him. You said you were ready, the older man muttered. Dean nodded. I am. The younger man stared at the floor, barely breathing. The security guard held his position. Even the air felt suspended, as if the building itself was listening. Dean leaned in just enough to be heard only by the man in front of him. His voice didn't harden, it didn't soften, it stayed exactly where it needed to be. You don't need to prove who you are, Dean said quietly. Everyone here already knows. The sentence landed without impact, without drama. No threat, no challenge, just truth. The older man froze,
his expression tightening as the meaning settled in. Dean wasn't appealing to fear, he was removing the need for it. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then the older man exhaled slowly. His shoulders dropped just a fraction. "Get him out of here," he said, not looking at the younger man. The younger man didn't wait to be told twice. He walked carefully, exactly as Dean had instructed earlier. Not fast, not slow, like someone who belonged. Dean straightened and stepped back. "That was the right call," he said. The older man didn't respond. He didn't have to. The night had already decided how it would end. Minutes later, the corridor emptied. The tension dissolved quietly, without witnesses, without headlines. No one would talk about it the next day. No one would write it down. That was the point. Dean returned to the stage and finished his show. The audience left smiling, unaware of how close the night had come to being remembered for something else entirely. Years later, people would still call Dean Martin the King of Cool. They'd talk about his voice, his charm, his timing. Few would ever know that sometimes the most powerful thing he did wasn't sing at all. It was knowing exactly when to speak and when a single sentence was enough.